You're listening to a live recording of the Living While Leading podcast, which was broadcasted on LinkedIn. In this episode, I engage in an unscripted conversation with Ragna Ghoreishi, Vice President of Customer Success at Kling. In our discussion, we share our insights on how to move beyond fear and step confidently into your professional journey. This conversation will inspire you to embrace your authentic self, recognize your value, and amplify your awesomeness. You're listening to Living While Leading with your host, Sharon Ehrlich, where I help women IT executives gain more control over their careers and carve out time to care for themselves and family. Thank you very much, everybody who has decided to join us. We're going to kick off this Living While Leading Executive Corner episode with my guest, Ragna Ghoreishi. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sharon Ehrlich, and I am an executive coach and a strategist, and I work mostly with executive women and women in leadership roles. We are going to jump right into it, but first I just wanted to explain that this is a very interactive session and sort of like a mentoring session. So if you have any questions at all, please enter them in the chat and Ragna and I will try to respond to them. So as we get started, you can already type in where you're tuning in from. I'm tuning in from Vienna. Ragna, where are you tuning in from?
Vienna as well.
Okay, so why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling people what you do?
Yes, sure. And thank you very much, Sharon, to welcome me here. I'm really happy to be here with you. So my name is Ragna Ghoreishi. As you said, I'm VP of Customer Success in a SaaS startup called Kling. It's a SaaS platform that is used specifically in the media and entertainment business for big iconic sports brands like the NFL Plus, for example, Tennis Channel, etc. It's a European startup. However, the biggest area of business is done in the US, which is why we have a lot of American customers. And before that, I have been working a long time in IBM and had various roles, both on a country and EMEA and also a global role, and specifically working in digital sales and focused on customer experience in the last couple of years.
Okay, well, so a lot of experience there and some varied experience as well. We have some folks dialing in from the UK. Debs, it's really nice to see you here. We have a few folks here from Vienna, including Timea and Elizabeth. And we have someone dialing in from Madrid as well. So welcome, Alex, and welcome, everybody. We are going to dive right into the questions because we don't have a lot of time here. And that there's so much value that I know you're going to add that I think we need to get started. So the first question I'm going to ask you, Ragna, is how do you define authenticity in leadership? And why is it critical for women executives and any executive for that matter?
Well, authenticity for me is really trying to be yourself. So not to play a role, but really trying to be yourself, which delivers trustworthiness. It shows also that you're human. It shows that you dare to show also areas that are perhaps not that perfect yet, where you're still learning. And all of this behavior shows strength. And it also provokes the same behavior in teams or people that you're working with, which ultimately leads to a much better collaboration and more openness, basically, in the business area, I would say. And why is it so important for women? I think specifically for women, it is important because we have with this a chance to really fight also stereotypes, because at the end, everybody, no matter if a man or a woman, has their very specific attributes of leadership style. And I think attributing them either to a male or to a female side is probably falling short on what your personal attributes are. Hence, I think it is very, very important that specifically women show their own way of leadership and authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And you said something that just one word that I think is so important to focus on, being human, that we all have very unique identities.
Hmm.
And being able to show up as you are is a lot easier than putting on a facade every day, whether or not you're working in real life or remotely and trying to be somebody that you really aren't. That gets incredibly exhausting, doesn't it?
Yeah, agree.
So, moving on, what strategies have you found to be effective in overcoming fear, especially in high stakes professional settings?
That is a very good question. So I have to confess, I'm an over prepper. So I have been a couple of years ago, I saw a very inspiring TED talk, I think, about Steve Jobs, where basically it was explained how he was preparing, how meticulously he was preparing in order to, when he comes on stage, come across so easygoing and so natural. And that is something I'm not where Steve Jobs is, definitely not. But I got inspired by him in terms of really understanding that you have to prep, because you have to really know what you can expect. So things that I do, for example, is I write down what the worst things are that could happen. Yeah, because that reduces fear already. Or I write down what the potentially most difficult questions are that could come up. And for all of this, I really prepare myself, because then it's much, much easier to react on them, because you have anticipated that they come across. Another thing that I'm doing is I do have a picture with a very good sentence on it that gives me strength. So a recommendation I have is there any power picture, power quotes that you like? Try to visualize it before you get into a meeting, because that really helps and gives you strength and energy. And the last one, very simple. Sometimes I just sit there and tell myself, I'm going to do that. I will make it happen. I will be successful.
Well, there are a lot of nuggets there, and I'd like to just focus on a few of them. You know that I am a coach and I work with a lot of women. And one of the things that I notice that successful women, and actually many women, struggle with, and I've been corrected by men, and they've told me that they struggle with the same thing, is perfectionism. And this drive that we have to do everything absolutely correct. So when you think about the preparation that you take for a meeting, or particularly one that you think is a high stakes one, how far do you go before you say it's enough? I need to stop and just get on with the thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. You have to find a balance. I try to think of everything, but without having too much fear, and realizing that there will always be things that I'm not able to control, because at the end you don't know what's coming up, but you can anticipate, let's say 70%, 80%, and that gives you already a bit of a peace of mind.
The other thing that I wanted to tap into is when you said in your preparation that you focus on not only what you have to be prepared for, but also the difficult questions and the worst case scenarios. Is that something that you do by yourself in preparing, Ragna, or do you work with your team to get some other perspectives, or how exactly do you go about that?
It depends a bit on the meeting, but it's a good point. When it is something where I also need the expertise of the team, I definitely involve everybody, because it's clear that I don't know everything. And the various aspects of knowledge and insights that the team has definitely are important. So I would do that. Yeah.
Can you share a moment in your career where being daring led to unexpected success for you?
Yes, I can. And the interesting that there are two ones. One is really a pivotal one that happened 1.5 to 2 years ago. The other one happened a bit earlier in my career. The headline above all of them is basically, it's the moment when I started to be active and take my life in my hands. Let's put it that way, and not stand still and wait for someone else to do something for me, but really be active and own on the space myself. So the smaller one, which was a bit earlier in my career, was really when I was working part-time, which I did during some time when I was taking care of our kids as well. I never really dared to ask for price for income increases or any career path or anything. And I thought just by doing the job good enough, it will be visible. And we all know, I assume that is not necessarily a good strategy. So at one point in time, I started asking for the things I wanted rather than imagining them. And I was really surprised how easy it actually was to get what you want, not 100%, but at least 80, 90% of what you wanted when you just ask for it. That was the one. But the pivotal moment for me where I realized how powerful it is and how much energy it gives you when you really dare to get out of your comfort zone was when I decided around 2 years ago that I really want to make a big change in my career, leave my secure corporate job and really join a completely different space and a completely different type of company. And that for me was really something I was afraid to do that. I did it, and I'm super happy that I made that decision and I was daring enough. And I have a bracelet that I keep on looking by and then to remind me on that, because that is for me really like a moment of braveness that gave me so much energy and so much life strength. That was really my pivotal moment, I would say.
Thank you for sharing that. We have some comments from the folks. So we have Deborah. Debs says, we are challenged when we step outside of our comfort zone. When we step out, we either grow or we learn something about ourselves. Yeah, you are speaking the truth, sister. That is so true. And, I can share a story as well. When I decided to be daring, I thought about starting my own business for a very long time and sort of did it in fits and starts, so I had worked for a company and then I had the proverbial side hustle, so I was always doing a little bit of something, but never doing the thing completely. And finally, I decided to do it. And that was a big deal because I was a corporate citizen for quite a long time. And you know what? I haven't looked back since I made that decision. And that was a bold move. There's something to be said for getting a paycheck every single month. And then all of a sudden, being responsible for creating a pipeline, looking for customers, creating visibility for yourself. And it's not easy. I wouldn't say that at all. But what I can say, like Debs just mentioned, it has shown me some things about myself that I just didn't know I was capable of doing. I didn't know I had it in me, but I have it in me. We also have a comment here from Elizabeth, when we going back to the previous question about preparation, Elizabeth says, part of my preparation equals preparing for when I don't know or want to answer a specific question. I get clear in my mind about how I want to respond to tricky situations. Thanks for sharing that, Elizabeth. Ragna, how can leaders cultivate a culture that encourages others to be daring and authentic? And the reason I'm asking this question is because in plenty of organizations, there is a culture that failure is a disaster. If you make a mistake, you will get called out and you will be humiliated in some sort of way. And that is not a culture for growth. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you can cultivate the opposite kind of culture.
Yes, and it's a good question, and sometimes it's probably very hard to change a culture individually. But nevertheless, I think as a leader, you have a lot of power in your hand, and the answer is very simple. I think you need to lead by example, because by then you are authentic and you encourage your team to also be daring and really show their own feelings, strength and fears, etc., and their concerns. And when you see that positive behavior, reinforce it and really celebrate it, because it is not easy to get out of yourself, specifically when you have been grown in brackets in a culture where fear was a strong a strong driver. And when you change to another team, it's very hard to overcome that behavior that you have learned basically in another team. So wrapping that up, I think leading by example and showing being human yourself is the best and the strongest way of convincing your team to look in that direction.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, you said something very interesting, that culture is hard to change, or at least organizational culture, but we do have team culture. And I can tell you that I've worked for some organizations that have had such an extreme competitive culture that failure or just this willingness to take a risk and do something different really paralyzed people and kept them from doing things. But on the other side, I was lucky enough to have some leaders who sort of created a microcosm within the organization. So within the team, people were allowed to take some risks and they were somehow protected by that. I don't know how many of you who are listening now have experienced a real culture where, taking risks and being daring and authentic is something that you've been able to experience. Please share that in the chat as well, because I think if you have, you're probably one of the lucky ones, because it's not always a given that that's the kind of environment that we can work in, right? Ragna, what advice do you have for women who struggle to find their authentic voice in male-dominated industries?
That's an interesting question, and I probably have a strange answer on that one, but it is the one that I learned over the years myself. So I've always been working in male-dominated areas, and specifically now in the last 2 years, my space is very male dominated. And what I realized on myself is that I ignore it. I don't care if I have an audience where I have 100 men and no woman except for me, because I realize that it doesn't help me at all. And it doesn't make a difference, because at the end, when you bring across with an authentic voice, with knowledge, with expertise, what you want to bring across, and you're daring, it doesn't matter. I know that not everybody can do that. I really, really do it. There are cases where I'm on events or on meetings, when I see the pictures afterwards of these events, I only then realize that I was the only woman on that event. That really happens. It's interesting how your brain can absorb that. If you can't do that, I think another advice would be to turn it around into something positive, to take it as a source of energy and proud to be the woman in that space that has the chance to be there and speak. That would be the two strategies that I would recommend. But the bottom line is really try to make yourself as strong as possible. And that is something you achieve by being authentic and being yourself.
I love the reframe there about seeing yourself as being the only one in the room. So that could be the only woman. It could be the only person from a very specific identity group, right?
Yeah.
The only one in the room. You can flip that on its head and say, I'm going to take advantage of this and I'm going to be the star, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, the self-talk is changing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Right? Because now you're not the only one who doesn't somehow belong there, but you're the only one who gets a moment to shine in some way. So I'm going to put a question to the folks who have dialed in with us and ask, how do you deal with it when you want to be authentic, but you find that you are outnumbered by whatever that may be? It may be men, it may be people who are more expert than you are. How do you go about finding that strength so that you can share your voice and authentically present your ideas, your thoughts, and your expertise? Anybody willing to share, please do that, because I think this is really an interesting lesson that we can all learn from one another. Now, one of the things that you also mentioned was self-talk. You said that you find ways to motivate yourself. So you have this motivating quote, I think you mentioned, and there are things that you say to yourself to get you ready for whatever that is, challenging meetings, huge presentations, because I'm sure that you're on the main stage very often. Was that something that developed over the years, or was that something that you were able to sort of capture and harness and use very early in your career?
No, it had to develop. I have to say, I really had to grow on that one because it did not necessarily come naturally to me. So I do like to work on things in a concentrated way, not necessarily go out there. So I had to grow that muscle, and it did take quite a while. And I would not say I'm perfect. It's something you grow. I think with each challenge you grow, and there are moments when you're strong where it works well, and then there are moments where you think afterwards, actually, I could have done that a bit better. But that's how it is. That's why we're human.
And the benefit of hindsight is that you can look back and say, I could have done that better. And now that arms you and prepares you for the next time, doesn't it? When we talk about the topic of being the only person in the room, because I'd like to go back to that. There was a huge book written by Sheryl Sandberg. I don't know if you read that, called Lean In, where she encouraged women to not sit on the sidelines and to use their voice and to use their power. And she got quite a bit of pushback for that, because a lot of people said, well, it's very easy for you to say that as you were like a huge mega, executive at a big company. What would you say to someone who doesn't have the title and the experience and the stature that you have in your career now, somebody who's maybe a bit more junior, about finding their voice and standing somehow up and being visible and in articulating themselves?
I think it's important that you find allies. I think it's important that you find good mentors that advise, that you look up to, and that really can help you in that very specific element that you want to grow. And I think it's important that you don't pressure yourself too much, because you will feel when it is the right moment, because everybody has a different pace. Some people might do that because they have a certain character, a very extroverted, strong character, do that very early on. And some people might need a bit longer until they are able to speak up and express what they think. And that is okay. I think that is something everybody should not pressure himself too much or herself too much, because everybody has their own pace. And that is something that I found interesting at times, looking back now, that sometimes people were pressured into areas that they actually were not ready yet, which then did not allow them to succeed, or made it very difficult for them to succeed. And yeah, so that would be my recommendations. Try to find an ally, and when you're ready, speak up and enjoy that moment where you are actually heard then.
Thank you for saying that. And I think this is a really important statement you made about your own pace and not putting unnecessary pressure on yourself, because I think that can do more damage than good. I mean, our intention here is to put the notion out there that you can speak up more, that you can create visibility for yourself, but certainly not at the risk of you doing it at a time that's not right for you and for your timeline. That's really one of the things that I think is really important. We have some comments here from the chat. We have Debs, who says, first and foremost, as Ragna said, be yourself. Celebrate the fact that you have a seat at the table and occupy that space with your expertise, wisdom, and confidence. Thank you, Debs. We have a comment here from Rafaela. For me, the strength lies in the message. I need to believe that what I have to say is important. That gives me the strength to speak up. Thank you for sharing that. I think those are really important and motivating words there. And Andrew has said something here, which I think is fantastic. He says, as one of the guests on our podcast said a while back, and Andrew has his own podcast, as do I, if you don't have a seat at the table, then make your own seat and bring it. Yes, I really like that. I think that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that.
I would love to add one more thing, because I think that's important. At least it's something that I realized. I sometimes question my own insights when I heard other people speaking very confidently about something that I generally found not right. And it took me really quite a while to stand up to say, actually, I disagree. And that really takes a lot of strength and daring. But it is important that you don't question your own knowledge. And as I think Deb said before, trust in your confidence, trust in your knowledge and in your expertise. I think that's super important. Just because other people speak very loudly or very convincingly about something, it doesn't make them right.
You know, there is so much truth in what you just said there. Have you ever been to those meetings, Ragna, where there's always like this loudmouth know-it-all, and they're just sort of like spewing a lot of heat and a lot of energy is coming out of their mouth, but there's not a lot of substance behind it. I think we've all had this experience before. And, you know, sometimes they're intimidating, aren't they? Because they are the loudest person in the room. And I think that those words that you just said and that guidance is really golden, to not to be intimidated by those loud mouths and the ones who are somehow omnipresent, because we also have something to add there. As my parting question, I would like to ask you, what would you tell your younger self as a piece of advice, as if you could?
Start standing up and owning your destiny much, much earlier. Just get up and own your space. And there's a lovely quote. Not sure if you know that film, The Holiday, with Kate Winslet and Cameron Diaz and Jack Black. And there is a scene, a seasoned Hollywood director tells to Iris, Kate Winslet, who has some love problems. There in films, there's always a main female role and her best friend. For a reason, you only play the best friend rather than the female male main role in your life, and I don't understand why. So basically, what I would love to say is play the female main role in your life and own that space early on.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are really powerful words, and thanks for sharing it. I will look for that film. Well, we are down to the last 2 minutes. And so what I'd like to say are a couple of parting words. First off, Ragna, thank you so much for being with us. I think that you have managed to share some real nuggets of gold with our viewers here today. And I really appreciate you being here. For anyone who is catching this on the replay, you can find this recording next week on Tuesday on my website, and you can also find it on Apple and on Spotify. Next week, I'm going to have a guest named Katie Brown, and we're going to talk about how to take action now and overcome the not ready barrier. And I think that's going to be a fantastic discussion. So thank you, everybody, for your engagement and for joining us today. I appreciate your feedback and look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks for listening today. This is your time. Give yourself permission to reclaim what's important to you and be who you want to be. If you're getting value from this podcast, please subscribe, share it, or write a review. And connect with me on livingwhileleading.com or on LinkedIn. And don't forget to tune in next week.